Unusual twists and turns in the plot await you in this incredible story. A woman gives birth at the age of 65, and not just one, but twins. Because of the birthmark, suspicion fell on her son-in-law. Who is the real father? Listen to the end, comment, and like. Subscribe to not miss new interesting stories. We begin. Jennifer was pensively looking at the champagne bubbles in a tall glass and listening to another toast in honor of the birthday girl when the first wave of pain hit her. The woman turned pale, convulsively clutching the fork that was lying next to her. I knew I shouldn't go, she thought fearfully, and if it's serious, how will I get out of this wilderness? For the last few days she had been feeling a little sick. Therefore, she thought of various reasons not to go to the country boarding house to celebrate the birthday of Helen's coworker. But the girls were persistent, and she agreed, especially since she had recently managed to pick up a great weekend dress that concealed her lush forms, which in itself was a real miracle with her great weight. Oh, and I got fat again. The woman was upset, looking at herself the day before in the mirror. Diets categorically did not help, although Jennifer tried them a great many. And when she was young, so easily lost weight, though she ate everything. And now she got better literally from a glass of water. She was going to start gymnastics and Nordic walking on Monday. And here it is, probably overheated in the sun, decided the woman. With difficulty, she got up from the table and walked to the chaise lounges in the shade. But as soon as she took a few steps, she was literally bent in half by a new wave of girdling pain. Helen, the birthday girl, gestured to her husband, who was congratulating her, and hurried over to her. What happened, Jennifer? She looked into the department head's widened eyes in horror and recoiled. Quick, someone call an ambulance. She was gently placed on a chaise lounge, but the woman could neither sit nor lie down. All the time until the ambulance arrived, which seemed to her like an eternity. She, like a stray, was thrashing around the glade decorated for the holiday. What's wrong with me? She thought in panic. Is it really the end? Having lived to the age of 65, Jennifer had never known any disease with such symptoms. She could only hope that the paramedics would figure it out and help. When the ambulance arrived, the woman was so exhausted from the undulating contractions that she could barely keep from screaming out loud. A very young doctor with a pleasant beard gave her a cursory examination. He felt her pulse, frowned, and took her to the car. There he told her to lie down on a stretcher and hesitated, frowning more and more. He shook his head, realizing, began to feel her abdomen. What's the time frame? He looked tensely into the face of the unfortunate woman. What's the deadline? She echoed. The doctor took off his glasses and began to rub them with a paper napkin. Pregnancy. Honey, pregnancy. You're having real contractions. Jennifer felt her heart twitch treacherously and start beating furiously. Pregnancy? But it can't be, she whispered with pale lips, and felt a warm wetness running down her legs. When the doctor saw this, he wrinkled his nose in pain. Andrew started up. Let's go. The water broke. There was so much genuine concern in his voice that the middle-aged man who was smoking by the car immediately flew into the driver's seat. Let's hurry up, or we'll give birth on the road. The doctor's hands shook nervously. The driver looked at him with round eyes and drowned the gas pedal. Never once in his life had he seen such an old woman in labor, and how many he had transported in his 10 years of ambulance work. Looking at the woman, the doctor took off his watch and began to calculate something. They had been on the highway for about 10 minutes when he touched the driver's shoulder. Pull over, Andrew. Here we are. The man behind the wheel pulled over and turned around in surprise. It was still halfway to the hospital. Contractions every 2 minutes. We can't get there. The doctor explained. They must have strained. Get ready. We will give birth. While the driver radioed for help, the doctor once again carefully examined the woman in labor. He laid out a surgical kit in case of emergency. He moved the medicine case closer. Jennifer lay with her teeth clenched tightly together. She was insanely hurt and insanely ashamed. Who would have thought that the only night with a man in years would turn out to be such a nightmare? But how could she, an experienced woman who had given birth to 2 children, not know she was pregnant? As they prepared her for delivery, she moaned weakly. It was her own fault. "Shut up," she ordered herself and bit her lip. But the doctor encouraged her with a smile. "Scream if it's easier, and let's start pushing and breathing." The woman noticed how the young man tried in vain to control the trembling in his hands, nodded and began to mentally pray. Let it be, she decided, and squeezed her eyes tightly shut, helping the little man to see the light. 10 minutes later, the neighborhood of the Federal Highway was announced by a loud baby cry. The happy doctor quickly examined and treated the premature but viable infant. He was about to congratulate the mommy on the happy ending to her unexpected pregnancy when he noticed that labor was still in progress. The exhausted woman was lying motionless and breathing heavily. "Don't relax, honey. Don't relax. Looks like you're having a multiple pregnancy." The woman clutched her hard and started pushing and praying again. And 5 minutes later, another little screamer was born. The resuscitation team, which arrived from the perinatal center, heartily applauded the elderly woman in labor and the doctor who coped with the difficult situation. Then they were quickly loaded into a specialized car and taken to the maternity hospital. In the evening, daughter Nicole and son-in-law Jason stomped by the bedside of a sobbing Jennifer. The babies were placed in a sterile box for premature babies, and the relatives were allowed to visit the woman in labor. "Mom, how could this be?" Nicole wrung her hands in despair. "Not knowing you're pregnant is unthinkable. It's twins." She only shook her head sorrowfully. "It's all my fatness. I thought I was just gaining weight. I was on diets." Nicole sat down on a nearby chair. "How are you going to raise the kids by yourself? Tell me who the father is." Jennifer shook her head negatively. The daughter began to get angry. "What am I supposed to tell Christopher? He's going to call today." The older woman waved her hand weakly. She was in a quarrel with her eldest son, so he got all the news from his sister. "Don't tell him anything. I'll call him myself when I get home. It's taking too long for us to get back together. It's time to make peace." Nicole frowned. "Yeah, all the more reason," she said. She turned to her husband for support and raised her eyebrows in surprise. "What's wrong?" Jason looked up, his face white with tension, and poked at the phone screen. The nurse on duty had kindly snapped a picture of the newborns in the NICU for Jennifer. After all, they weren't allowed to visit them yet. It was these photos that Jason was looking at. Nicole stared at the pictures with interest. She stared for a minute, not understanding, then shuddered and turned her anger-darkened eyes on her husband. "Oh, you rascal." The naked babies lying in special transparent boxes had identical birthmarks on their right shoulder, exactly the same as Nicole's husband Jason. The man frowned. "Nicole, come on. How could you think that?" Jason looked at his spouse indignantly. "Then how can you explain this?" The young woman angrily poked at the screen. Jason spread his hands. "I don't know. It's a birthmark in our family, passed down from generation to all the men in the family. My grandfather had it, my father, me." He scratched the back of his head. "But I swear, I had nothing to do with your mom's kids." Nicole put her hands to her sides. "You better come clean. Although, you don't have to. I'm filing for divorce." She slammed the door and rushed out of the room. Jason looked at Jennifer, almost crying. "At least you can explain to your daughter that nothing happened. She'll do whatever she decides. And we've only been married 6 months. I love her." And he ran off to catch up with his wife. The old woman's eyes went blurry. She couldn't tell her children who the father was. It was beyond her. Jennifer lay back against the wall and cried quietly. How was she going to cope with 2 children? 65, not 30, not the same strength. She stood up, reaching for a new stack of tissues. No, she felt quite well. She had no addictions and no serious health problems. But that's now. What about 5 or 10 years from now? She sobbed again. How would she tell her children that she'd given birth to Jason's daddy? The shame of it. The older woman stared at the ceiling, remembering. Before the wedding, Jason had taken her and Nicole to meet the father who'd raised him. She'd liked Michael, a retired military man, immediately. He was gray-haired, but he looked young, with an officer's bearing and an excellent athletic figure. And the atmosphere of the spacious country house disposed to romance. Right after the formal part, the kids were off to the city. With their own interests, Jason's father had persuaded her to stay the weekend. She couldn't resist his advances. And then, of course, she blamed herself. She declared that nothing could happen between them. She ran out in the morning like a naughty girl. I was sure that there would be no consequences because of her age. And now twins. Jennifer sat up on the bed. She reached for the things her daughter had brought, ran a comb through her hair, looked in the mirror. Enough of this sulking. It's time to pull herself together. She pulled her cell phone out from under the pillow and dialed Michael's number. Michael, hi, can you come over? There's something we need to discuss. As she described the situation to him, she choked back sobs, but she kept talking and talking and talking, afraid to stop. There was an ominous silence on the other end. Jennifer was frightened. Don't you need all this? She said timidly. Dictate the address. We'll figure it out. The man's voice was ringing with tension. And an hour later he came into the room with a huge bouquet of flowers. I thought it was a joke until the last moment. But when I saw the nurses' faces when they said your name, I knew it was true. You should have seen their mouths open. He sat down on the chair next to her, looked carefully into her eyes, kissed her on the cheek. Congratulations, Mommy. Now, stop being so damp. Kids are always great. Don't worry, we'll manage. Later, they stood together at the huge window of the intensive care unit, looking at the children lying in the nurse's arms. Yeah, there's no getting away from it. Both of them have our birthmark. Michael laughed softly. Think, Mother, what we'll call them. And she smiled happily, looking at the children moving outside the window, and again experienced the almost forgotten feeling of the great joy of motherhood. A month later, Alex and John, who had gained weight, were taken home by their happy parents. Michael insisted that Jennifer and the children move in with him. Children are better to grow up in nature, and not in the smoke-filled, exhausted city. On the occasion of the meeting of the brothers from the maternity hospital, Jason organized a grand party with a fancy feast and beautiful fireworks. Jennifer, without regret, left work and plunged headlong into family life. Thanks to the troubles, she had lost a lot of weight and looked beautiful. Or maybe it was the unexpected motherhood and late-life love that suited her. Michael looked at her with burning eyes and never left her side. He, too, loved the feeling of being a husband and father. They decided for themselves not to get sick and not to age, because children need, even if not the youngest, but healthy parents. Both took up sports, began to lead a healthy lifestyle. A year later, Jennifer was unrecognizable, gathered for a year of twins relatives, met a slender young woman with bright smiling eyes. She gladly showed the gathered her flower garden with bushes of beautiful roses and peonies. She showed a small greenhouse with cucumbers grown by her own hand. Michael held his sons in his arms and sincerely admired his wife. Indeed, everything that is done is for the best. Jennifer and Michael's life was filled with caring for twins Alex and John. The boys grew up cheerful and inquisitive. Jennifer devoted herself fully to the children, household chores, and the garden. When Alex and John went to school, Jennifer decided to do something else. She began to knit and embroider beautiful things, which were gladly bought by acquaintances and even strangers. So, there was a small home business, which brought income and joy. Michael still loved and protected his second family. On weekends, they would ride bikes together, play soccer with the boys, go fishing. Michael's eldest son Jason and his wife Nicole also often visited his father and younger brothers. So, in love, care, and mutual understanding past the years, Jennifer and Michael grew old, but remained as in love and happy. Their examples showed that it is never too late to find true love and the joy of motherhood, fatherhood, if you really want it.